In a shocking escalation that has stunned military analysts across the globe, a Ukrainian F-16 fighter jet launched a perfectly executed, high-stakes strike on a Russian aircraft carrier, reportedly housing 150 top-secret next-generation jets, a move that is now being described as one of the boldest, most catastrophic blows in modern naval warfare. This wasn't just any ship. It was a symbol of Russian maritime pride, a floating fortress built with classified technology, armor with advanced radar absorption coating, and guarded by layers of anti-air, missile, and electronic defense systems. But none of that could stop what came hurtling toward it at Mach speed from the skies above the Black Sea. The Ukrainian pilot, whose identity is being kept classified for security reasons, carried out the mission with surgical precision, utilizing every ounce of training provided through NATO exercises and Western doctrine. The operation began with coordinated electronic warfare maneuver, jamming the carrier's early detection systems and effectively blinding its radar. Within moments, a swarm of decoy drones appeared on radar, giving the illusion of full-scale aerial assault, drawing defensive attention away from the actual attacker, a lone F-16 operating under radio silence, flying low, hugging the terrain, and then rising into clouds to avoid infrared tracking. The moment the jet was within range, it released a modified bunker-busting air-to-surface missile, specially engineered to pierce through the ship's reinforced hull. Impact came seconds later, and what followed was nothing short of hellfire erupting from the ocean. The explosion shook the sea, illuminating the night sky for miles as the carrier's midsection went up in flames. Secondary blasts rippled through the vessel, likely from the onboard fuel depots and the highly combustible experimental jets it was carrying, rumored to be a new class of stealth fighters rivaling anything in the U.S. arsenal. Fire engulfed the flight deck as internal ammunition stockpiles cooked off, sending massive fireballs into the air. Satellite imagery later confirmed that the carrier began listing to one side before capsizing entirely within an hour, leaving behind a floating graveyard of twisted metal and black smoke. The implications of this event are seismic. For one, it completely shifts the naval balance in the region, as Russia just lost one of its most advanced war machines, along with years of research, secret aircraft technology, and hundreds of elite crew members. But even more significantly, it sends a message that Ukraine, with Western support, can strike not just ground targets, but also highly defended naval assets in open waters, a red line few thought would be crossed. In Moscow, the Kremlin went into immediate lockdown mode, with emergency meetings behind closed doors and no official confirmation of the scale of the loss. State media went silent on the incident, while internal leaks suggested panic at the highest levels of command. Meanwhile, in Washington, London, and Brussels, the reaction was a mix of surprise and strategic recalibration. The fact that a single F-16 could infiltrate Russian naval defenses and obliterate such a critical vessel is being analyzed from every angle, from the effectiveness of U.S.-supplied weapon systems to the psychological and strategic fallout this will have on Russia's military doctrine. For Ukraine, this isn't just a tactical victory. It's a symbolic one. It demonstrates that despite being outnumbered and outgunned, they possess the resolve, intelligence, and growing military capability to challenge one of the world's most formidable forces on land, in the air, and now at sea. As footage of the attack, filmed from both drones and satellites, makes its rounds online, the narrative begins to crystallize, a David versus Goliath story unfolding in real time. The daring strike is already being hailed as one of the most effective use cases for modern air power in an asymmetric conflict. It's also sending shockwaves through global military communities. Defense departments from NATO to Asia-Pacific allies are reviewing the event for insights into modern warfare, including how low-cost tactics and precision strikes can neutralize high-value targets. Military academies will likely study this mission for years to come. But let's not forget the human side of this story. On board the carrier were hundreds of trained personnel, some of whom were likely not even aware of the mission they were supporting. Reports indicate that rescue attempts were made, but the speed at which the fire spread and the structural damage of the carrier made survival nearly impossible for many. As families grieve and nations react, Ukraine has made no official statement taking credit, though insiders suggest it was a direct response to escalating Russian naval aggression and missile strikes against Ukrainian port cities. In the geopolitical realm, This strike is expected to escalate tensions even further, perhaps pushing Russia toward more aggressive countermeasures or even cyber retaliation. The world now waits, holding its breath, as one question lingers in every war room. What happens next? For now, what's certain is that a line has been crossed. A powerful nation has had its pride shattered in spectacular fashion by a country it once believed it could overpower in days. The destruction of a Russian aircraft carrier by a single Ukrainian F-16 is not just a battle victory. It's a paradigm shift. The old rules of war no longer apply, and the future will be shaped by those bold enough to challenge the giants. What was once unthinkable has now become history, and the consequences will ripple across oceans and generations to come. In the aftermath of the jaw-dropping strike that turned the tide of modern warfare, the entire world stood frozen, holding its breath in disbelief as satellite imagery confirmed the decimation of the Russian supercarrier, a vessel previously thought to be invincible and cloaked in layers of mystery. The Ukrainian F-16, once seen as a symbol of resilience, now ascended into legend, having executed one of the most daring and precise military operations ever recorded. Intelligence reports revealed that this aircraft carrier was not just carrying jets. It was a floating vault of secret next-gen fighter technology, weapons still in prototype phases, and experimental stealth aircraft that Moscow had long kept hidden from the global stage. As the smoldering remains sank into the frigid waters, seismic geopolitical shifts rippled across the globe. NATO scrambled high-level emergency sessions, with generals and strategists analyzing every millisecond of the engagement. It wasn't just about the strike. It was the audacity, the message, and the implications. In Kiev, the streets erupted in cautious celebration, not out of pride, but in relief, knowing that their air force had just rewritten the rules of aerial warfare. The pilot of the Ukrainian F-16, now being hailed as a national hero, reportedly maneuvered through state-of-the-art radar jamming, electronic warfare storms, and a deadly screen of Russian air defenses using a combination of U.S.-trained evasive maneuvers, satellite intel relayed in real time, and sheer nerve. No Hollywood film could have captured the intensity of that moment. Dodging hypersonic interceptors, skimming the radar horizon, locking in coordinates on a moving target protected by dozens of automated defense systems, and finally releasing a payload that struck with surgical precision, igniting a chain of explosions that tore the steel beast in half. Russia's military command, blindsided and humiliated, went silent for hours before issuing a grim statement denouncing the act as unprovoked aggression. But behind closed doors, panic set in. Billions of rubles and decades of black budget research had just been reduced to molten metal in the sea. Defense officials scrambled to determine how their most guarded asset had been compromised so thoroughly. Cyber teams scoured networks for breaches, wondering if this had been a result of espionage, internal betrayal, or a new unseen level of Western surveillance and coordination. Meanwhile, major world powers including China, India, and Iran watched with intense interest. What had once been a slow, grinding conflict had escalated into a high-tech shadow war, where every strike carried with it diplomatic, military, and economic consequences. For the United States, this mission served as undeniable proof that its training, hardware, and battlefield strategies, when handed to the right ally, could achieve spectacular results. Across Washington, D.C., key military advisors reviewed data, footage, and pilot logs, identifying this moment as a potential turning point, not just in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, but in the global balance of power. Ukraine had demonstrated that even with limited resources, precision, courage, and modern tactics could shatter traditional warfare paradigms. Back in Russia, state-controlled media scrambled to rewrite the narrative, but the truth had already gone viral. Social media was ablaze with footage captured from space, intelligence leaks, and global commentary. Memes, analysis videos, and expert breakdowns flooded YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter. People weren't just watching history. They were engaging with it, dissecting each frame of destruction as analysts speculated about what this meant for Russia's military credibility. But beneath the spectacle, a deeper question haunted every strategist on Earth. If a single Ukrainian F-16 could dismantle such a massive symbol of military might, what did that mean for future warfare? Aircraft carriers, once the undisputed kings of naval dominance, were now vulnerable in ways previously unimaginable. Military doctrines that stood for decades began to shake. Nations with expensive, outdated fleets began questioning their viability in a world of asymmetric, precision-guided engagements. The psychological blow to Russia's naval command was immense. Morale among sailors and officers dipped sharply as orders came to retreat critical vessels closer to defended waters. Meanwhile, Ukraine's confidence soared, not in arrogance, but in determination. This victory wasn't just tactical. It was deeply symbolic. It told the world that no matter how powerful or well-funded an enemy might be, a single moment of bravery, guided by technology and willpower, could rewrite destiny. U.S. defense contractors and military analysts saw a surge in inquiries from allies eager to upgrade their F-16s, integrate new targeting systems, and deploy similar operational models. The incident also raised alarming questions. If Ukraine could do this now, what would happen if similar tactics were adopted in the Pacific, in the Middle East, or near contested islands? In Moscow, internal investigations intensified, with whispers of sabotage, betrayal, and broken chains of command making their way to Kremlin corridors. President Putin, already facing internal unrest and economic strain, was now confronted with a colossal military disaster, one that would be impossible to spin or hide. The loss of the aircraft carrier wasn't just material. It was cultural, spiritual, strategic. It symbolized the collapse of an illusion. That Russian power was untouchable. This was the 21st century version of Pearl Harbor. Not in body count, but in shock value and consequence. And for the Ukrainian pilot who pulled the trigger, there was no celebration, only reflection. In interviews, he reportedly said, "We don't seek to destroy, we seek to protect. But when a monster threatens your people, you don't hesitate." His words resonated worldwide. Songs, poems, murals. His story inspired millions. And in classrooms, war colleges, and policy think tanks, his mission was dissected as the beginning of a new military era, where one man, one machine, and one moment could shift the tectonic plates of power. The ripple effects are still spreading. Military budgets are being reallocated. Carrier fleets are re-evaluating their defensive doctrines. Nations are investing more in stealth, AI-assisted flight paths, and anti-drone technologies. But perhaps the biggest takeaway is psychological. Power no longer lies solely in size or numbers. It lies in adaptability, speed, precision, and the courage to strike when it matters most. The Ukrainian F-16 pilot didn't just destroy a warship. He destroyed fear, doubt, and complacency. And in doing so, he reminded the world that even in the darkest skies, a single jet can light up the future. As the smoke curled into the horizon from the initial wave of destruction, the Ukrainian F-16 fighter jet didn't slow down for a second. It looped back into skies like a hawk that had just wounded its prey, but wasn't done delivering the final blow. On the Russian aircraft carrier, alarms blared like banshees. Crew members sprinted to battle stations in a frenzy, and automated defense turrets activated with spinning fury. But it was too late. The Ukrainian jet's advanced avionics were tuned to perfection. Every movement was sharp, calculated, and locked on the massive Russian vessel that now looked less like an invincible warship and more like a floating target. Inside the jet, the pilot, call sign Ghost 9, engaged the next sequence of armaments, including a pair of bunker-busting missiles designed not just to explode on contact, but to penetrate deep into the core of the ship and eliminate whatever classified machinery or payload lay hidden within. Intelligence had confirmed what Ukraine long suspected. This carrier wasn't just another piece of Russia's navy. It was a covert operations behemoth, housing 150 advanced jets, many of which hadn't even been publicly disclosed, hidden beneath reinforced hangars built to evade satellite detection. With NATO satellites now capturing every moment in real time and global news agencies beginning to flash breaking banners across screens worldwide, there was no turning back. The missiles detached with mechanical hiss and streaked toward the carrier like thunderbolts from Olympus. Russian electronic warfare systems tried desperately to jam them, to redirect or detonate them midair, but the missiles were coated in stealth polymer, equipped with adaptive targeting software designed to maneuver around interference. And then impact. The carrier shuddered with a force that sent shockwaves across the surrounding sea. Flames erupted skyward as massive explosions began to tear through the inner hull, one after another, like a chain of volcanic eruptions going off inside a steel coffin. Jets on board ignited where they were stored, creating a domino effect of fuel-fed devastation that overwhelmed the ship's internal firefighting systems. Russian sailors tried valiantly to contain the disaster, but the scale was simply too massive. From above, Ghost 9 watched as black plumes formed the shape of a mushroom cloud, evidence of secondary explosions reaching deep into munitions storage areas. Strategic command posts buried within the hull were vaporized in seconds. The ship's nuclear propulsion core began to fail, and emergency protocols kicked in to jettison remaining power systems into the ocean. But by then, the superstructure had already begun to collapse inward. The once mighty carrier tilted at an angle, smoke belching from every level, a steel giant falling into the sea with slow, horrifying inevitability. As it began to sink, messages from the surviving Russian fleet poured out in encrypted panic, requesting air cover, reinforcements, anything. But there was no response. Ukrainian Air Command confirmed the destruction. The carrier and its 150 secret aircraft were gone, permanently erased from the map, and the world took notice. Russia's propaganda machine couldn't spin the loss. Satellite footage was irrefutable. NATO declared the moment a shift in modern warfare, where asymmetric strategy and precision air power could dismantle what was once considered untouchable. The Kremlin, enraged and humiliated, convened an emergency war council, unsure how to respond to such a bold attack. Sanctions tightened, cyber warfare escalated, and both sides scrambled fighter squadrons to critical fronts. But the psychological edge had tilted dramatically in Ukraine's favor. Analysts began calling it the strike of the century, not just for its strategic gain, but for what it represented. A smaller, agile force standing up to a nuclear superpower, and winning not just with firepower, but with intelligence, speed, and resolve. In cities across Ukraine, civilians cheered in the streets, not for war, but for defiance, for proof that their country was no longer at the mercy of foreign dominance. Meanwhile, in Washington, London, and Berlin, military brass reviewed the footage again and again, marveling at the precision and calculating how such tactics could be applied to future global conflicts. Defense contractors scrambled to accelerate production of similar next-gen fighter systems, while Russian engineers scrambled to assess the wreckage and develop countermeasures before the next wave of tech rolled in. The strike's ripple effect didn't stop at geopolitics. Economically, the shock sank energy markets and led to immediate realignments in oil shipments and naval escort policies. Entire trade routes were now under review. Insurance rates for cargo passing through contested waters skyrocketed. For Russia, it was more than just a naval loss. It was symbolic gut punch, the unveiling of vulnerability in an empire that prided itself on strength. Meanwhile, Ukraine's allies saw the opportunity to push harder, provide more support, and perhaps end the conflict on terms that had once seemed impossible. The skies above the Black Sea were now crowded with surveillance drones, AWACS aircraft, and patrol jets, each eyeing the horizon for what came next. But the one name echoing through all military channels, all social feeds, and all political corridors was the same. Ghost 9, a pilot whose courage and execution had changed history in a matter of minutes. And as the sun finally rose over the charred waters where a Russian colossus once floated, a single message remained clear to every enemy force watching. There are no more safe harbors, no more untouchable titans, and no more underestimating a nation that has tasted both survival and victory. The age of new warfare had dawned, and it came screaming through the sky with the roar of a single F-16. With the wreckage of the Russian aircraft carrier smoldering beneath the waves and the international community still reeling from the sheer audacity of the Ukrainian strike, the world entered a new chapter of military engagement, one written not in the traditional ink of tank divisions or fleet armadas, but in the vapor trails of high-speed jets and the glowing data streams of real-time intelligence. Ghost 9, the Ukrainian pilot whose call sign was now etched into military folklore, became an instant legend not just in Ukraine, but across the entire alliance of nations resisting aggression. Journalists clamored for interviews. Artists painted tributes, and military academies rewrote case studies to include the unprecedented operation. But while the world celebrated, the gears of global conflict ground harder and faster. Within days, Russia responded not with diplomacy, but with digital fury. Massive cyber attacks were launched against Ukrainian infrastructure. Power grids flickered, Government servers were targeted, and disinformation campaigns intensified across social media platforms. Yet Ukraine, hardened by years of digital warfare, repelled most of the attempts, having fortified its cyber defenses with help from allies and an army of young tech-savvy engineers raised on code and crisis. The F-16 strike wasn't just a blow to Russian naval power. It was a tactical unveiling of how modern war is no longer about size alone, but agility, precision, and technological supremacy. Across the Atlantic, in the Pentagon's underground situation rooms, generals reviewed heat map visuals and real-time satellite feeds with grim focus. For years, doctrines had prepared for conventional scenarios, but this was something else. A third-tier air force had dismantled the centerpiece of a global powers navy in under 15 minutes, and done so with pinpoint intelligence and almost surgical precision. That realization sent shockwaves through NATO command structures. New playbooks were written overnight, funding was reallocated, and F-16 squadrons were suddenly given top priority in fleet modernization programs. The implications stretched far beyond Eastern Europe. In the South China Sea, U.S. naval commanders took notice, recalibrating their own defense postures amid fears that other state actors might try similar surprise maneuvers. Meanwhile, back in Ukraine, Ghost 9 wasn't resting. The pilot, whose identity was kept secret for national security, was already back in a secure bunker, reviewing telemetry data and participating in debriefings. Every detail mattered: altitudes, speeds, missile trajectories, jamming sequences. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a new doctrine. Ukrainian military planners dubbed it the Phantom Doctrine, a strategy that leveraged agility, unpredictability, and psychological impact. The wreckage of the carrier, though mostly submerged, became a dark monument under the sea. NATO divers and surveillance subs attempted to analyze what remained, recovering black boxes, aircraft fragments, and high-tech debris, some of which confirmed long-held suspicions about Russia's experimental aircraft development. Some of the jets on board were rumored to be unmanned prototypes designed for stealth reconnaissance and long-range disruption, platforms that, had they reached operational readiness, could have reshaped battlefield dynamics across Eastern Europe. Their destruction not only eliminated a threat, it stalled an entire shadow program. Within Russia, political fallout was swift and severe. Internal factions clashed over blame. Whistleblowers leaked classified information about carrier vulnerabilities and budget misappropriations. Morale plummeted in the Northern and Pacific fleets, and naval commanders were quietly replaced. The Kremlin, trying to save face, launched retaliatory strikes across eastern Ukraine, but the damage had already been done. Their invincibility shattered, their mystique dissolved. The message was out. No matter how massive or mysterious, no vessel is immune from justice when backed into a corner. From Washington to Warsaw, military alliances realigned their strategies. Air bases once considered support hubs were transformed into frontline tactical response centers. More F-16s and multi-role fighters were deployed across NATO's eastern flank. Satellite coordination with Ukraine became round-the-clock, with heat mapping, signal intelligence, and deep learning algorithms scanning every inch of Russian movement from the Black Sea to the Arctic. For the average Ukrainian citizen, the strike brought a bittersweet mix of hope and fear. On one hand, it was validation that their country was not just surviving, but actively resisting with strength. On the other, it was a reminder of escalation. Schools in Odessa practiced shelter drills. Emergency broadcast systems were tested in Lviv. Yet the resolve remained unbroken. Churches rang bells in honor of Ghost 9. Children painted the fighter jet in murals. Volunteers flocked to recruitment centers. A sense of unity, forged in fire, held the nation together. And globally, nations under the threat of aggression saw the strike as a symbol. Small didn't mean weak. A nation fighting for its survival could, and did, dismantle a symbol of overwhelming force with courage, coordination, and precision. Defense analysts called it the greatest asymmetric victory since Pearl Harbor. Documentaries began production, using declassified footage and pilot recordings. Military think tanks held emergency summits. And in quiet corners of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, pilots sat in simulators, learning the moves of Ghost 9, the pilot who became the blueprint for the fighter of the future. Meanwhile, on the diplomatic stage, Ukraine's allies pressed for expanded support. More F-16s were pledged. Longer-range missile systems were approved. Economic packages flowed faster, and even previously neutral countries began reconsidering their stance on involvement. The tide of war had shifted, not just in bullets or bombs, but in belief. The belief that the impossible could be done. That David really could strike down Goliath when armed with the right tools, the right timing, and an unbreakable will. As the waters of the Black Sea swallowed the last visible fragments of the Russian aircraft carrier, the world was left not just with headlines, but with a warning. No empire, no matter how vast, can ignore the resolve of a free people defending their homeland. And no ship, no matter how armored, can float above justice forever.